In an English castle around the year 1512, the Earl of Northumberland woke up and was handed a quart of wine. At breakfast, before he'd done a single thing, his morning came to 2 fine white rolls, a quart of beer, that quart of wine, and a plate of salt fish. Down in the same house, on the same cold morning, a servant got a hunk of coarse brown bread and a mug of weak ale. Same castle, same hour, 2 completely different breakfasts. In a medieval castle, what landed on a man's plate announced exactly who he was, and you could read his whole rank off his food before he opened his mouth. There was one place inside those walls where that broke down completely. We'll get to it. Everyone pictures the feast, the roasted swan dressed back up in its own feathers, the boar's head, the sugar castle carried in on a board. That happened, but rarely, and never once for most people. A feast was a weapon of status, wheeled out to impress a bishop or a king. It tells you almost nothing about how a castle actually ate. The real story is the ordinary table. The bread, the stew, the salt fish, the barrels in the cellar, and 5 very different households sitting down to it on the same cold morning. Start at the top. The man with the wine ran one of the great houses of the north, and he ran it like a government. The 5th Earl of Northumberland, a man happy to be called Henry the Magnificent, governed his Yorkshire castles by a book that fixed, in writing, exactly what every mouth in the household was owed, meal by meal, rank by rank. Be honest about the date. It's early Tudor, a little past the high Middle Ages, but the household still ran on old lines, and no lord left a sharper picture of a table sorted by blood. And the sharpest detail is which mouths the wine skipped. The Earl's own sons, the heir to the entire earldom, young Lord Percy, sat down each morning to a single white roll, a half-loaf of coarse household bread beside it, a pot of beer, and no wine at all. The finest thing on the table stopped 1 generation short of the boy who would inherit everything. In his own father's house, the future Earl ate a rank below his father, and the book made sure of it. Even going hungry was ranked. Through Lent, when the church banned the rich foods, the Earl and his countess gave up breakfast on the strictest days of the week. The children of the house kept theirs every single morning, straight through the fast. Self-denial was a luxury the powerful performed. The young were spared it. A great household ran as a ladder, and the wine only reached the top rung. If an earl ran his table like a government, the actual government ran the largest table in England. Edward IV's officers kept their own book, later called the Black Book, and it did for a royal court of hundreds what the earls did for one castle. The date is late again, the 1470s, but the logic is pure medieval household. It fixed what they called the bouche of court, the exact daily ration of food, drink, and firewood every rank could draw. A duke drew so many loaves, so many gallons of ale, so many candles. A knight, fewer. A page, fewer still, right down to the boys who scoured the pots. The whole court was a pyramid of daily allowances, each line of it a quiet notice of where a man stood. The Black Book records no feasts, only the daily count. Even at the summit of the kingdom, the ordinary business of feeding people was a machine for sorting them. The finest record of how that machine actually ran came from the least likely place, a widow's account book, kept almost by accident. Dame Alice de Bryene ran her own manor at Acton, in Suffolk, and she never set out to write history. She just had her steward set down every single meal her house served for a year, every loaf, every pigeon, every herring. About 16,500 meals, roughly 45 a day, every day. Family and servants and the endless travelers, a gentlewoman was expected to feed. The astonishing thing about the book is how ordinary it is. Take a plain Thursday in August, 1413. The house put out 146 loaves, a quarter and a half of beef, a whole lamb, 2 joints of mutton, 3 flitches of bacon, and 30 pigeons, on a day when nothing special was happening at all. Pigeons did a lot of that quiet work. A dovecote kept a house in fresh meat through much of the year, when little else came fresh. No feast in any of it. Just a machine that had to put food in front of dozens of people twice a day without a single day off. And even here, a full step below an Earl, the pantry kept spices, pepper, saffron, ginger, cinnamon, cloves. Across the whole year, Dame Alice spent about 50 shillings on them, and used them so carefully it came to only about half an ounce a day for the entire house. Which kills the most repeated myth about medieval food, that cooks drowned their meat in spice to hide the fact it had gone off. They didn't. Spice cost a fortune, and no one perfumes meat they could just throw to the dogs. Rotten meat got thrown out. That pinch of pepper was money you could taste. Now follow the food down, past the high table, to the people who cooked it, and carried it, and ate at the very bottom of the hall. Their bread came off the same grain as the Lord's, milled at the same mill, and came out brown. White flour took more sifting, and yielded less, so the fine loaf cost more to make. The white went up the table and the coarse went down, and everyone could read the difference every morning. Their drink was small beer, the thin second brew even children drank all day, closer to a food than a drink. The strange part of a servant's pay is that most of it was the food itself. A senior man, a yeoman, might take home 13 shillings and 4 pence a year in actual coin, plus cloth for his livery. But the meals, the roof, the place at the bottom of the hall, were the larger, unwritten half of the wage. Being fed by a great house was a kind of wealth, in a world where most people fed themselves, and often came up short. You could see the whole order in one glance, because the household ate together. When dinner was ready, in the late morning, a horn went up. Everyone washed their hands. They were all about to eat with them, and nobody owned a fork. And they sat in one hall, top to bottom, in a fixed line. The proof of it still sits in the language, above the salt and below it. One big salt cellar stood on the high table. Sit above it, near the Lord, and the food improved as it reached you. Sit below, and you got the plain version of everything, every single day. Every plate in that hall named a rank, every plate but one, and that one was waiting outside the walls. Walk out of the hall, across the yard, up onto the walls, and you reach the household that broke the rule. A garrison, a castle held by soldiers and no one else, where the food did one job: keep a man on his feet with a weapon in his hands. That took a staggering amount of fuel. Hauling, digging, standing a watch in armor, throwing a man back off a ladder. The estimates put a working soldier's need near 5,000 calories a day, about twice what a man is told to eat now, and the ration was built to hit it, heavy and plain. 2 or 3 pounds of good bread, close to a pound of salt pork because pigs were everywhere, and salted down into bacon. Cheese, dried fish, a pot of pottage, and bite from whatever was cheap, onions, garlic, mustard, vinegar, and ale by the gallon. That gallon-a-day figure is real, but it belongs right here, to garrisons and great households, not to every peasant in England, whatever the myth says, and the men weren't drinking it out of fear of the water. That's a myth. They drank water freely. Weak ale was simply the cheap daily calories, and everyone from the garrison to the nursery ran on it. Then look at what the plate stops doing. In the Earl's house it announced, to the herring, exactly where a man stood. Up on the wall it goes quiet. A captain still ate better than a common crossbowman, but the gap shrank to a matter of degree. The one household brace to be attacked was the one household where a man's food nearly stopped naming his rank. Down in the cellars behind those men, the same barrels that fed them each day were also a countdown clock on the whole siege. But that thread belongs to another video in this series, and it can stay there. 5 households, 5 plates, and under all of them, the same 2 foods, eaten by nearly everyone from the Earl to the potboy, every single day. The first was pottage. The most important dish of the Middle Ages was a pot of thick stew that basically never came off the fire, grain, usually oats or barley, simmered down with whatever the gardens and stores could spare, leeks, onions, cabbage, peas, beans, greens, a scrap of bacon if there was one, thin and grim in a poor house, thick and good in a rich one, brightened with saffron for the high table, but always there. Medieval food was mostly a bowl of gray-green stew, and it was fine, and it never stopped. The second was bread, and bread was a ladder all by itself. At the top, the manchet, fine, white, soft, the roll in front of the Earl. In the middle, maslin, the everyday loaf of mixed wheat and rye. And on the table itself, the trencher, a thick slab of stale bread used as the plate. Food piled on top, the sauce soaking in, and afterward the gravy-logged trencher was collected and given to the poor at the gate. The grander the diner, the whiter his bread, and the less chance he ever ate the plate under it. Every person in the castle had a fixed rung on that ladder of loaves. None of these households grew everything they ate, and the greatest of them barely grew anything, because they never stopped moving. Behind every plate stood a supply operation, and for the king it had a name and a menace, purveyance. The crown claimed the right to buy provisions at a price it set, not the sellers, to send officers ahead of the traveling court and take grain and livestock and carts, and pay late or under the odds or not at all. The purveyors came backed by armed men, and most villages dared not refuse. Some seized more than they paid for. Some pocketed the difference. Some just impersonated the king's men and robbed the place outright. For the countryside the court rolled through. Feeding the king was a licensed kind of plunder. But the biggest hand on all 5 plates was the calendar. The medieval church made about a third of the year meatless. Every Friday, most Wednesdays, and Saturdays, the whole of Lent, the weeks of Advent. On the strictest of those days, eggs and butter and milk went too, so cooks learned to fake them with almond milk ground from imported nuts. That's why saltfish turns up in an earl's breakfast and a garrison's barrels alike. It was the law of the year, and it fell on the lord and the soldier and the servant more or less the same. A meatless third of the year on top of a long northern winter meant that for months at a stretch almost everything anyone ate had been dead since autumn. Most beasts couldn't be kept fed through the cold, so around the 11th of November, Martinmas, the feast of St. Martin, castles across Europe killed the surplus they couldn't overwinter and turned, for days, into a slaughterhouse and a curing works. Meat went down into barrels of salt, or up into the smoke to become bacon and ham. Fish, mostly cod, got split and air-dried into stockfish, stacked in boards as hard as timber. So hard it had to be beaten with a mallet and soaked a day or more before it could even be cooked. For a good part of the year, nothing on the table was fresh. The castle ate the last autumn out of a barrel. Nobody chose stockfish for the taste of it. It was February, and it was that, or nothing. All of it met in the kitchen, an open fire that burned all day, iron cauldrons that never came off the heat, ovens for the bread, spits turned for hours by kitchen boys. But the thing that really shaped the cooking is one we've completely forgotten. To a medieval cook, food was medicine. Everything edible was sorted as hot or cold, wet or dry, and a good cook balanced a dish the way a doctor balanced a patient. Beef counted as cold and dry, so you boiled it and drowned it in sauce instead of roasting it drier. Fish was cold and wet, so you fried it or warmed it with spice. The hot, dry spices from the East were prized, partly because they were thought to fix a cold, damp northern diet. Pepper was taken, quite literally, as medicine. A cook reaching into the spice box thought he was keeping the diners well, and that spice cost a fortune, which is the whole point of it. A pound of pepper could run to several days of a working man's wages. Saffron, hand-plucked from the crocus, thousands of flowers to the pound, could cost something like a month's wages for that single pound. So when a pantry doled out half an ounce a day across a whole household, it was spending like a jeweler, one careful pinch at a time. Go back to the one ordinary morning, and the 5 castles waking to it, the Earl with his wine and his white rolls, the king drawing his bread by the book, the widow at the head of 45 meals a day, the servant with his brown loaf and his small beer, and the soldier on the wall with his heavy ration and his gallon of ale, eating almost the same as the man beside him, because the wall might be stormed by afternoon. One country, one calendar, 5 plates that could not have been more different. Nobody needed a coat of arms or a title read aloud. The color of the bread, the presence of wine, the fineness of the flour told the whole thing before a word was said. Power in a castle wasn't something you held. It was something you ate,